Lots to talk about today. The G7 summit, the military spending, energy sector, all kinds of stuff. And joining us to discuss this is Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. Brian, good to have you with us. Let's start with Alberta's darling Stephen Guilbeault. He's not environment minister anymore, but apparently he's in charge of Parks Canada. And now there's some rumblings that he could actually use his role to place new national parks in the way of oil or pipeline projects. It actually doesn't surprise me. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, this came from Alberta Premier Danielle Smith on her weekend radio show talking about this and worried that Guilbeault would do this. Parks Canada used to be with Environment Canada. He gets to keep it as he moves over to Canadian Identity, what we used to call the Heritage Department. The guy who was in charge when Jasper burned gets to be in charge of Parks Canada still. He still won't answer properly on the whole issue of the forest fires and that timber wasn't cleared for years, despite warnings from federal officials and from provincial officials back to Parks Canada. Still hasn't answered for that, but I digress. He's been asked to set up 10 new national parks. And it turns out one of the areas they're looking at, and Danielle Smith is worried that they'll look at others in Alberta that could be on a pipeline route, but they're looking at an area on the shore of Hudson Bay in Manitoba that is one of the spots that Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew says, you know what, we could put a port in there and that could be a place where we could export oil from. And he is in favor of it. And Stephen Guilbeault, of course, is the guy that said, we don't need more pipelines and we're about to hit peak oil, so we don't need any more oil.
I think it's a pretty safe guarantee to say that's going to happen with Guilbeault in there. He's going to do everything he can to stop it, right?
Well, unless Mark Carney steps in and says no, perhaps at the behest of Wab Kinew and Danielle Smith, I think you're right. Stephen Guilbeault would try something like this. There's a lot of people looking at Mark Carney's government and saying, oh, he's doing better than I thought, or he seems more conservative. He's still got all the radicals, the left-wing radicals from Justin Trudeau's government in his cabinet, including Stephen Guilbeault. So whatever you might think of how Carney's doing, and your mileage may vary, he's surrounded by people like Guilbeault.
Yeah, I mean, he's saying all the right things, right, Carney, but again, we're waiting, does this thing have legs? Is there actually something going to take place, right? And speaking of pipelines, again, Premier Danielle Smith in Alberta here saying she thinks she will actually be able to persuade BC Premier David Eby to allow a pipeline through his province. And Eby saying, hey, I'm not the one stopping it. It's just a lack of investment money, no proponent to actually build the pipeline. So, your thoughts?
Okay, he's also saying that he doesn't want it. He has said he doesn't want it, that BC doesn't want it. I think that if you polled the population of British Columbia, you might get a different answer. But yeah, Danielle Smith has said she'd try and persuade him. Ontario's Doug Ford says he's going to talk to him and try and persuade him. And Eby said, don't waste your time, Doug. There's a lot of pressure to get these national projects going. I was speaking to another premier this week, said, we've got to do it. We've all got to be doing this to help the country grow. And some, like Eby, it's, no, I just want BC to grow. I don't care about the rest of the country.
Well, that would help BC grow. Anyway, we'll leave Eby behind for a minute here. But Prime Minister Mark Carney yesterday announcing a big boost in NATO defense spending, right up to 2%, this year. So, but today a report from the Auditor General saying, hey, the cost of those F-35 fighter jets, and those are destined for Alberta, CFB Cold Lake, that's skyrocketed. So what's behind that big uptick in costs?
Incompetence by the Canadian Armed Forces. That's what it comes down to. There's a chart in there that shows you the 46% cost increase from what they claimed it would cost in December 2022, when they said it would be $19.9 billion. And now they're saying it'll be $27 billion, 27 and change. Well, the actual cost of the plane only goes up a little bit, and then it's the contingency, it's weapons, it's everything else that Canada's responsible for. This is not Lockheed Martin that's making the planes that's driving up the cost. There's also the fact that they say a fluctuating exchange rate. Well, I looked, I think December 2022, when they made the announcement, the Canadian dollar was at about 73 cents. Right now, the Canadian dollar is at about 73 cents. The month earlier, when they had perhaps drafted the plan, it was at 75 cents. So that's perhaps a bit of a weird excuse by the Auditor General. My guess is that there's some of this going on, that when they first announced the proposal, they try and get the dollar figure as low as possible to make it palatable to the public. If it's healthcare spending, they make it as big as possible. Defense, they make it as small as possible. But the reality is, it was always going to cost more. But they're doing things like the hangars and the infrastructure that are needed at CFB Cold Lake and CFB Bagotville in Quebec. They're not going to be ready for years and years. Some of the infrastructure will not be ready until 2033, 34. That's another 8, 9 years away.
So,
Paul,
so nobody can see that
the planes will
coming?
be 50. The planes that we're currently flying will be 50 years old by then.
Oh man. Yeah. Somebody's got to learn how to plan ahead a little bit. I'm just saying.
They're 3 years behind on building this infrastructure in
Yeah.
Bagotville and Cold Lake.
Yeah. So something. I mean, does anybody ever, yeah. I mean, I guess lose their position over these kinds of things. I mean, to get the right
You
people
get
in
shuffled.
place. Or just reshuffled basically. So something needs to change fundamentally in the way the whole system's working there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, wow. And again, of course, there's more defense spending. That money is coming in now. It's going to be an increase. So are they going to spend that money in a good way? Do they know what they're doing in the years ahead? Yeah, I'm not so
This
sure.
is one of the big concerns and questions, and Prime Minister Carney was asked about that several times when he was making the announcement at a news conference here in Toronto yesterday. He acknowledged that defense procurement is really bad. It's a combination, has been for decades, combination of the generals and the admirals and all the top brass getting involved and arguing and bickering, changing their mind, but also the bureaucrats at what we used to call public works. I think it's called Procurement Canada or something now. They're always also changing their minds or getting in the way or delaying projects or making it overly complicated in ways that it shouldn't be. And so all of this has driven up the cost. But on the F-35, the fact that the infrastructure that we have to build to accept the planes the Americans are building won't be ready tells me that it's incompetence on the part of the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces. And so that does put a real question mark. Look, this spending is needed. And, I wrote a column supporting it. I've been calling for this for a long time. So if the Carney Liberal government's going to do what you've been calling for, you better say good. And so I did that yesterday. But I do worry in this audit. I'm not so much worried about the cost going up as all the reasons why the cost is going up, such as they're 3 years behind schedule, such as they can't deliver. Those are the real concerns for me. Government projects, the cost is always going to go. It's like renovating your own home. You start thinking the price is one thing, and by the time you're done, it's always a lot more, right?
Yep.
So we can all relate to that, but it's the incompetence that worries me.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, maybe they've got too many cooks in the kitchen. I don't know. Maybe more DEI hiring would help, or not. With this military spending increase, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre finds himself in a kind of a strange spot, having to say that he actually supports the government. Poor guy. You've been writing about how hard that job is, opposition leader. So, I mean, is this the kind of thing you're talking about here?
Oh, absolutely. Look, Polyev didn't even call in the election campaign for spending to increase this fast. I believe he was saying we'll get there by 2030, another 5 years from now. And Carney comes in and says, we'll do it now. Well, Polyev, he's not going to turn around. He knows that a lot of conservative leaning voters support the military. He's not going to turn around and say, oh, you shouldn't spend this money, boo hiss, and don't worry about NATO. So, he had to come out and say he supports it, but then he's looking for where can I find a point of differentiation? And he comes up with, but we need a budget. Okay, some people are going to care about that, but the average voter, especially the average middle of the road swing voter who, votes, for the Liberals this time, maybe was looking at Pierre prior to Carney, those swing voters, they don't care. And they're not going to care as long as the budget shows up in a couple of months. They don't care that it's not here right now. And so, Poilievre, he's trying to fight against the government while agreeing with them. And that's a bad and awkward position to be in. But it's why being opposition leader can be one of the toughest jobs in politics. He's going to have to find a way.
Yep, pretty tricky for sure. Now, last week you were talking to us about the possibility of a trade deal being announced with the Americans before the G7 meetings start this weekend here in Kananaskis. So is that still possible, you think? And will this extra military funding be part of that package?
I think the military announcement is Mark Carney setting the table for his announcement with Donald Trump. Trump will be able to say, see, I told you we were subsidizing Canada, and now we're not subsidizing Canada anymore. You've heard the figure. It started out at, I think, 100 billion that he was subsidizing us, and then it was 200 and then 250. I think he went up to 300 billion before bringing it back down a bit. Most of that is made up. It's fiction in his mind. It includes things like the fact that they buy so much oil, and that is the trade deficit, because they buy a lot of oil from Alberta at a discount. But on defense, they actually have been subsidizing us. We have not been pulling our weight. We have been just saying, well, we don't need to spend on that because the Americans are, they'll cover us, right? So we can start something else. We can spend it on having a great weekend, essentially. And now the bills come due. We've got to be an adult and pay that. So yes, I think that the trade deal will come through, but and Carney putting in 2% this fiscal year gives Trump the room to say, see, I got to win. He needs, if we want the tariffs lifted, he's got to be able to show something to the American people and the other countries that he's in a trade war with.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Do you think he'll be trying to squeeze the Golden Dome missile defense system in there as well and saying, hey, you guys need to buy into this as well? It's probably a good thing, to be part of, but man, it's costly.
It's costly, and lots of questions about will it work? Can it possibly work? I'm not qualified to say on that, but I think it's probably smart politics for us to go along with it for now and see what happens. You can always drop out later on. We are going to be covered. The Canadian government is now putting in for an over-the-horizon radar system to detect missiles and things like that. We are reinvesting in NORAD. So why not go along with this until either it shows it can work or shows that it can't, and then you get to bow out.
Right. Also some controversy about some of the people that Prime Minister Carney's inviting to the G7. Prime Minister of India, right? Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. So a bit of controversy there, right?
Yeah, some people are upset saying, well, Modi's government, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, he's been accused by the former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, of his government assassinating a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. That's a person that India had labeled a terrorist, but you still can't do extrajudicial killings on somebody else's soil. That's going to cause problems. But Carney's taking a different approach. He wants to repair the relationship. As far as Mohammed,
Saudi Arabia, Crown Prince, yeah.
Salman, he has apparently been a very modernizing force in Saudi Arabia, and there's an opening up. Of course, they're looking to sign the Abraham Accords with Israel. Probably a good move on that front. I know it's tricky, but that's due to domestic politics at home, and I'd rather Canadian politicians didn't play foreign politics in our domestic politics, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, there'll be lots to talk about next week after the G7. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
About a time here. Brian, thanks as always for a great conversation.
Thank you.